And we are back. It's our first real episode of 2026. Obviously, the last episode was our year-end awards. So we are back. It's been a couple of weeks, Nibs. Been over a month. Um, a lot has happened in the 5-6 weeks since we've been off the air. And I figured a great way to start the show would be to just kind of throw it to you and see what some of the highlights, high moments, low moments were for you in the last month and change of boxing, especially since I really didn't get to watch that much boxing.
Man, first off, man, welcome back, buddy. You know what I'm saying? We missed you around these parts. You know what I'm saying? Big part of ITR. I don't think everybody understands what that means, what Dakota means to the group, man. So, first off, hats off to you for, having to do what you got to do, make your money, man. We, but you were missed. Now, with that being said, you
Appreciate
got
you,
all the
bro.
bushy. Yeah, yeah. Don't ask too much more now. There's a lot that's been going on, bro. Like, I mean, we've had the emergence of Zuffa boxing, which is starting to get a little bit more steam. People are paying more attention to that. For those of you who don't know how to find it, it's on Paramount Plus, I believe, is where they are streaming most of their fights. You can find them on YouTube afterwards, but if you're looking for live action, Paramount Plus is where you want to find them. Um, MVP has continued to do some good work with women's boxing. They continued that work last month, and we're continuing to see them put on quality cards that do not include Jake Paul. I would say, man, that the big ones for me, as far as the fights that have occurred, to me, I think the big one obviously is Tiafimo and Shakur. I think we all thought that was going to go a completely different. Well, I don't know if we say a completely different way, but we thought it was going to be far more competitive than it ended up being.
Mhm.
I don't know what this does for either one of their careers, though. With that being said, like as dominant as it was for Shakur, if you're a Shakur fan, well, that's what you expected to see, right? But for Tio, it can be completely damaging because he didn't look competitive at all. Like it didn't look like he had any idea that that was what was going to happen, even though that's what he's been being told was going to going to happen the whole time. So I think it probably does a lot more damage to his career going forward than it actually raises Shakur stock. Although we did, we'll talk about this later, it did gain some ground for Shakur on our pound for pound rankings. I think a lot of people overreacted to the fight because I think people had Tio on a much higher pedestal than maybe we did here at ITR.
You think they overreacted in terms of the surprise at the one-sidedness? Is that what you're saying?
I think it because of how dominant Shakur was, and because of how high of a regard people had for Tiafimo. They're like, oh my God, this puts Shakur at number one. Not if you had Tiafimo at the bottom of the pound for pound to begin with. I think we barely had him on the list before this fight. So to me, it really depends on where you rank him, or had him ranked before this. I think there are some definitely more um, pound for pound worthy performances over the last several months than this one. But it was take nothing away from the young man. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. He was what he was supposed to do. Famous words, right? Treat a bum like a bum. Not saying that Tiafimo's a bum, but hey, when you can outbox a guy and completely outbox him, you do it. And that's what Shakur did. Hats off to him. It was a completely dominant performance. I think you know, I think it's actually going to make it harder for him to get the fights he wants going forward because of how dominant he was against the guy most people considered one of the stars in the sport. Um, then there's Zuffa boxing, man. I'm not going to talk about just one in particular, fight with them as I am just kind of as a whole so far. So, I mean, they've definitely put their money where their mouth is as far as gaining, on air talent, right? Like, they've got a pretty solid team as far as who they have commentating. You can't really get much better than that. You got the Hall of Famer Andre Ward. You got Max Kellerman, who has covered the sport for decades on end. and has been in and around the sport for going over 20 plus years. And then you got Joe Tessitore, as your blow by blow guy. On paper, you can't get any better. You know what I mean? But it definitely seems like they're all, you know, drinking the Kool-Aid. You know what I mean? When it comes to the to the Sheik and to Zuffa, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. And I don't know that I'm necessarily a fan of that. I appreciate the days when we had, HBO and Showtime. Yeah, they told us some of the guys in certain lines. But, if a guy came in there and, he was whooping the favorite's ass, they tell you. I don't see that that's going to go that way here, and I don't like the uniform of it. The guys having to wear a uniform. Just one guy wearing black trunks, one guy wearing white. That to me, it takes away from the showmanship that we've known boxing to be over the years. It takes away from the fighters' identities a little bit to me.
Being able for the fighters to be able to put some of their personality into their appearances.
And we've talked about this numerous times, right? It hurts their pockets. I mean, let's face it, boxers' shorts nowadays are billboards, right? And they pay for those advertisements to be put on there. And a lot of those guys, the money that they're making from, people buying patches on their shorts, pays for a lot of things. You know what I mean? Puts a lot of food in mouths. So I think you're taking away that ability for the fighters to earn. Kind of, it's the same model they use in MMA. With UFC, they stop letting guys wear their own trunks. You have to now wear the uniform. I just don't like it. I don't think it works well in boxing. And then again, like I said, it takes away from the pageantry of it, and that's part of it. You know what I mean? You get to see these guys come out and put on a show. You see their personalities. And again, they get to make a little bit of money off of the guys that are on their trunks. The product so far hasn't been that bad, but it hasn't been that great either. The in ring product that they've provided so far has been hit or miss. But you can say that about a lot of boxing. As especially
Let
since
me
they're
ask you this,
starting
Nibs.
new.
Let me ask you this, Nibs, and then I'll
Yeah.
let you finish. But obviously, you and I and many people in the kind of underground, if you will, boxing journalism scene have been skeptical of their entrance into the sport for a while. We've been skeptical of how they've, attempted to make changes to the Ali Act, and that seems imminent at this point. We've been skeptical of a lot of it because the way they've been talking is like, we're going to come into the game and we're going to slash and burn. Anything you thought was real, the belts, all that, it's all bullshit. We're going to come in and we're going to trailblaze and we're going to leave you all in the dust, right? Did you get the feeling that that's what was coming after your first Zuffa boxing experience?
I did, and it proved
Really?
to hold true because now Jai Opataya is fighting for the Zuffa cruiserweight title. Like they've announced that already, right? So they've already created their own title belts for guys to go after. It's kind of like they're creating their own UFC within boxing. Like, hey, like you said, we're not even going to acknowledge these other, sanctioning bodies, right? You win our belt, right? And there are going to be certain people that love that shit, right?
But the flip side of that is that, and again, I didn't see the entire event. I've seen clips, and I saw Max Kellerman saying he's been waiting his whole life for this, and it's a Julian Rodriguez fight. And I think Julian Rodriguez is tremendous, but if I remember correctly, Max Kellerman called Pacquiao Mayweather and some of the biggest fights in history, and it just feels like they're really trying to sell you something. And I'm not saying that they're not building something. It just doesn't seem maybe as much of a big bad wolf as it appeared. Because it seemed like they were more, because they're talking about doing unification fights now, within their platform.
I think what it is they're in theory, it's got its place, right? Like Zuffa boxing would have a place in boxing if it weren't trying to take over boxing. And I think that's the problem, is they're trying to take over boxing just like UFC did in MMA. UFC took over MMA,
They
right?
also bought Pride FC and then put it out of business.
Right.
You know, they bought the
Right.
competition and then shut it down. And who's to say they won't try to do that here?
They did the same thing with Strikeforce. They tried to do it with Bellator. Bellator wouldn't buy in, you know. So Bellator and I think it's PFL or they teamed up, you know, and now they have a partnership. So I think now it's just PFL. But it's, you know, you and who's to say that they won't eventually absorb them in some way down the line? But you know, I think it's a harder sell to even attempt to do that in boxing, right? Let's be clear, none of the sanctioning bodies are going to sell out to Zuffa. Like that's not,
It's a
you know,
hard sell, but to be fair, I think it's as easy of a sell as it's ever been when you have Top Rank that still doesn't have a streaming deal. It seems like the relationship between Golden Boy Promotions and the Zone is now a little bit of a gray area as well. So that's two major promotions that don't currently have an active ongoing streaming deal. And PBC is just a relatively inactive big fight promotion at this point, but what kind of big fights they're promoting, I think that bar is getting lower and lower. So if there was somebody to make this move, now would be the time. And it's all kind of been, the stage has been set by these fights with Turkey Al Sheikh, and everyone took the short money and handed their fighters over to him, and then he, you know, kind of ran him out of town. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds, and we'll cover it as much as we can along the way. I think one thing I just want to bring up, because it was one of the only fights I saw, was Raymond Marataya's tremendous win over Andy Cruz. I don't know if you got to catch that one, Nibs, but that was some high level shit, man. That was a real close fight between two very, very high level operators, top 5 lightweights, and in my view, you know, kind of the future pound for pound of the sport potentially in both of them. I would love to see them run that back. I thought Cruz fought a great fight, but Murataya was just able to be that much more assertive. And at least to me, you know, that was that was the best fight that I saw, at least in its entirety in my absence. And I just want to address Shakur's performance over Teofimo real quick. You know, I've seen people, like, those were actually the 2 fights that I saw. I've seen people be a little bit critical of Shakur's performance, and I don't understand that, bro. He was just so dominant. You know, it's not the first time we've gone, man, I wish Shakur would put his foot on the gas a little bit. But Teofimo just didn't have the mental stamina, the footwork, the anything to close that range and make something happen and make it a 2-way fight. So some of that has to go to Teo. Like, sometimes when you just have a one-sided fight like that, it's not that interesting. It's impressive to me. It was as good of a performance as you can have in that kind of a fight. And I don't entirely understand the criticism. You know, he wasn't running. He was right there. And it was a masterful performance.
you know what it reminds me of is Mayweather Pacquiao, right? Everybody blamed Mayweather for the fight sucking. It's like, well, hold on, wait a minute. There's 2 guys in that ring, bro.
The
Mayweather
difference was, though,
actually
Floyd
threw
did a
more
lot.
punches.
The difference was Floyd did a lot of holding in that fight. Shakur really didn't do any holding in this fight. He was right there in front of Teofimo, you know, slipping and
Right.
sliding, staying behind that front jab, making Teo pay with the check hook every time he closed that range. He's a master of range, bro. I just think it's going to be very difficult for anybody, even up at welterweight, I think, to beat this kid. I really do. I think he's very special.
I think what it comes down to is, for me, right, is you get a guy who's doing what he does, right? If I'm doing what I do and the other guy doesn't do what he came to do, right? That's not my fault. Like when Floyd fought his fight against Pacquiao, that's what Floyd does. You know what I mean? If you don't like it, you don't like it. But Pacquiao didn't bring his part to the party, right? If you watch the Shakur and Teo fight, that's what Shakur does. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But guess what? You were probably watching because you thought Teo was going to bring his part to the party, and he showed up with plates. You know what I'm saying? So, hey, just because I brought the chips and you didn't bring the beer, we still got to have a party, baby. So that it's that's what happened. Shakur did exactly what he said he was going to do. He did exactly what we expect of him to do and what he's done in the past. Tio didn't bring the Tio to the fight, right? And I think that's what you heard his dad in the corner talking about. You're not bringing your power, or you're not bringing this. His dad was critical of him throughout the entire fight. And it's like, well, it isn't that he's not bringing it, it's that it's being neutralized. He can't do what he normally does because the guy he's fighting is doing what he does so much better. And I think that's what ends up people calling, want to be critical of it because it was so one-sided that they got bored or whatever. Well, guess what, guys? That's what boxing is master. When you get a guy who can put on a master class in boxing, and the other guy who isn't prepared for that on the other end, that's what happens.
Listen, and if that's what you're looking for, I'm sure there's a shitty bar somewhere in your town that you can go and watch a couple of schmucks have a throwdown. That's always an option. But if you're looking at the best in the world and you're looking at hit and don't get hit, that was a beautiful display of it. So just real quick, because it happened this weekend, I wanted to briefly go through the Salida promotion card from Wednesday. Joshua Pagan getting a decent win over Jimenez. Let me make sure I know this guy's first name, Brian Jimenez. Really good things from Pagan. I believe he's 15-0 at this point now, but doesn't quite have the punching power that I'd like to see. And as much as he's got great boxing skill, he knows how to keep his range. I'm not seeing it for the full 12 rounds yet. Jimenez was tough. But it felt like in the 6th or 7th round, Pagan kind of got a tough lesson in, like, when you play with your food, sometimes it bites back, and had a rough 6th, 7th, 8th round of that fight. Closed the show strong. I think won, a 7-3, 9-1, anywhere in there type of fight. And then Caroline Vare got a ugly decision against Delphine Persoon in one of the ugliest fights I can remember seeing in a long time, Nibs. Multiple point deductions from both ladies. The point deductions from Persoon felt less justified. Vare spent the whole fight reaching out to grab. And when you got an experienced champ like Persoon, right? She's been a champion for whatever, 10, 15 years now. 2 classics with Katie Taylor, moving up in weight to do that. She lost her composure, man. She got emotional. She was getting angry. She couldn't get the ref to kind of understand her perspective, and lost the decision and was very emotional after the fight. And there was a part of me that understood why she was so upset. It's like, I'm this multiple time world champion. I come to the States. I can't get a fair shake. I'm on an undercard. I felt for her, man. I really did. So not a great showing for either of them, but shout out to Delphine Persoon, who's like 42 years old at this point and has had one hell of a career. I would say one of the unsung heroes of women's boxing in this era.
Most definitely. And she doesn't have to prove anything to anybody. You know what I mean? She's put in one of those careers where, even if she decided to call it a day after this rough fight, we'd all be saluting her and applauding everything that she's done, not only for the sport of women's boxing, but boxing as a whole. She's class act, and she's given us, like you said, some extremely entertaining fights over the years. And she's always, there's one thing she does, is she does come to fight. So there's never been a question of that.
Her first fight with Katie is one of the great action fights in women's boxing history. Truly, I think.
Period. And it's another one of those ones where people, if you're a hypocritical person of Katie Taylor, there are people who think she lost, or at least split her fights with Persoon. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, the second one was no walk in the park either. It was more one-sided for Katie because Katie's an all-time great who made some adjustments, but Delphine did not make that second fight easy for her either.
No, and I do think that Persoon, you could have done a coin flip with me on the first one. Definitely thought she lost the second one, but I tell you what, though, it's one of those things where I'm not mad. If they'd have ran it back a third time, I'd have been just as excited to watch that fight. You know what I mean? Because of what they were. It's like the Katie and Amanda fights, right? They're really, at the end of the day, I don't care which one of you wins. I just want to watch this fight because I know what I'm getting when you guys get into the ring. But Persoon, definitely, she's one of those ones, man. And when it comes to women's boxing, bro, if they have a Hall of Fame, I definitely think she's first ballot, bro, in my book.
That was a fight I always wanted to see, Nibs. I always wanted to see Amanda Serrano and Delphine Persoon. I think that would have been one hell of a fight. Moving on to next weekend, obviously the big fight of the weekend is Ryan Garcia versus Mario Barrios. The fight that nobody was really asking for, right? We just kind of got it. It's a decent fight.
Yeah.
I am mad at two guys in their primes taking each other on, but Ryan Garcia coming off of a bad loss and the strangest 2 years of a career that you could have, just about. Mario Barrios, a two-time defending world champion with 2 draws, has not won a fight since the win over Yordenis Ugas. Those draws being to Abel Ramos and Manny Pacquiao. What's your first impression of this fight, Nibs? My gut is telling me that Mario Barrios, I know what I'm getting with him. And I know that the ceiling and at one time the sky was the limit for Ryan Garcia, but I don't see a stable person. I don't see a reliable athlete in the same way that I do with Mario. And so my gut tells me that I can trust in Mario's experience and in his reliability. But what is your gut feeling on this one?
I'll say this. I think, one, Mario Barrios is a guy. He's one of those guys, right? Like every time you see Mario Barrios, whether you're a fan of his or not, he's going to fight, right? You know, like you just said, you know what you're getting with Mario when he gets in there. Win, lose, or draw, he's going to give you everything that he has, and he's going to do everything he can to win a fight, even if he gets outclassed, right? He's going to do everything he can. And considering that those 2 draws that he has were extremely entertaining fights, and I'd love to see him run them back, right?
God, that Ramos fight was a fucking classic, right?
Bro, like, you know what I mean? What else could you ask for type shit, right? So I don't even hold that. A lot of people will hold a draw against you like a loss. I don't. Not in this instance, right? I think Mario Barrios is still one of those guys. With Ryan Garcia, it's one of those things where his talent says he should be. But then the guy that shows up in the ring, you never know, right? You don't know what's going on with him. Based off of what he did, what he did with the Haney thing, a lot of people were expecting him to roll through Rolly. No,
The
no pun
problem is,
intended.
though, even with the Haney fight, of course, in retrospect, he's got a failed drug test. He misses weight by 3 pounds.
Exactly.
He has like a mental breakdown where he's on the phone talking about he got abducted by aliens and the kid completely went unhinged from reality, and I just don't think ever came back.
And again, it's one of those things where in the ring, he looked lights out. Outside of the ring, the kid's a mess, right? I think his in-ring talent is legitimate. I think his out of the ring issues haven't been fully taken care of, right? And he's admitted to, or at least there are people in his camp that have alluded to the status of his mental health. I don't know that it's fully been taken care of on that side, right? And just like the Furies of the world can tell you, mental health is extremely important. You got to take care of that shit, or the shit in the ring doesn't mean anything at all. So you have to take care of that part before you start stepping into the ring, and then stepping up against a guy who's not like, look, let's be really clear. Yeah, on paper, Ryan Garcia's got more natural talent than Mario Barrios. But Mario Barrios isn't the guy that's going to get the memo and say, yeah, let me just phone it in for this paycheck. You know what I mean? You're going to have to fight against Mario Barrios. And I don't know that Ryan Garcia is ready, bro.
I just, like you said, to add to what you said, I think that the athletic gifts, the explosivity, the hand speed, the one punch knockout power, the ceiling of the talent is obviously in favor of Garcia, but I don't know if he's in shape. I know Mario Barrios is in shape. I don't know if he's going to use those tools. I know Mario Barrios is going to use what he has. I know he's going to use the jab. He's going to stay on the outside. He's going to get caught in an exchange now and then, but he's going to be ready. And he's got a good, reliable chin. This is a guy who went 12 rounds with Keith Thurman. I just don't know that Ryan Garcia's power is going to intimidate Mario Barrios, who's been in with some real punchers and has been a welterweight and a junior welterweight for his entire career, whereas Ryan started at much lower weights. Would it blow my mind if Ryan Garcia got a one-punch knockout or had a moment like that? They kind of bailed out all of the flaws that he has. Yeah, I don't think that Barrios is like a world beater. I think he's a really solid champion who's going to be in the mix for the entirety of his career, but I don't think he'll ever be the guy. I don't know that that's him, but he's the real deal. And if you're not the real deal, I think that he'll take you to school. And I just don't know what we get with Ryan Garcia at welterweight, against a world champion who is not going to be intimidated by him in any way.
I mean, look, Mario Barrios has three things that you can't teach in boxing, right? He's got balls, he's got a chin, right? And he's just the right amount of crazy, right? So those aren't all things you can teach. I think every boxer has to be a little nuts, but Mario Barrios is just the right amount of crazy, right? So, and then you throw in the fact that he is a skilled boxer. His punching power hasn't come up with him from the 145 pound division, right? Like he's not knocking guys out at 147 or hurting them the same way.
I think he's a decent puncher.
Very solid puncher, but he's not hurting people the way he used to at 140. You know what I mean? We saw Devin Haney come up. His power has grown, right? We saw him, obviously his power has grown with him.
His is an instance of actually fighting at his natural weight for the first time.
Exactly. I think Ryan Garcia's power will gain at 147, right? Because we've all seen him. He was killing himself to make weight for Tank, right? And I get it. We all get that. You get a Tank fight on the books. You do what you got to do to make that fight. But even at 140, I think he was struggling to make the weight. Obviously,
he wasn't making the weight at all.
Yeah, right. So at 147, I think he's got a much better chance of ending the fight early. But the problem is will he be there up here?
Yeah, and is he in shape? I think that really is a big one. As far as I know, his pops is training him. He's a guy that's always kind of in front of a screen. I haven't seen any clips of him in the gym. Like I just don't. I don't know if he's taking the fight as seriously as Mario is, and there's only so far that natural, birth-given talent can take you. And at a certain point, hard work does beat the talent when the talent's not working. It's just a matter of, if Ryan half-asses it, he has a chance. If he trains some, he has a chance.
Really, the only person that I've seen Ryan Garcia in the ring against that was naturally more talented than him was Tank, right? And that's but you could say that about damn near everybody Tank fights. So, when he was in there against Haney, it didn't look like Haney was more skilled or better than him. You know what I mean? When he was fighting Rolly, the reason Rolly had the as good a fight as he did is because he hurt him early. You know what I mean? And then you saw Ryan was a completely different fighter from that point forward. But I think if Mario can hurt him early,
I think the other example would be Luke Campbell, where Campbell dropped Ryan early, was boxing some nice rounds, was probably winning that fight if I remember correctly at the time of the stoppage, and then Ryan just caught him with a beautiful shot to the body and he couldn't get up. I could see that happening in this fight. I could see Mario winning a boxing match and then boom, it's over.
Yeah, I mean he's been hurt to the body before. We saw that in the Tank fight. It's the only fight he's been stopped in, if I get me right. I mean, he had a whole nother head growing on his head when he fought one time and still kept fighting, right? Like he was still in that fight, even with
that's what I'm saying. I think you can rely on his chin. Thurman's a big puncher. Yeah. Ugas was a decent puncher. Like he's been in with some guys that can do some hitting that were real welterweights.
And hey, even at Manny's older age, Manny can still pack a punch, right? And Mario took all those punches. Abel Ramos, I mean, look, he's like you said, he's been in guys who can do some damage to you, and I don't think he's going to get knocked out unless it is to the body. I think he is, I think Tank did the right thing in stopping him to the body. I don't think he was going to knock him out upstairs. If there is somebody who could do it, it would be Tank. But I think Ryan is possible. But I think, if he's going to stop him, it's probably going to be a body shot. But here's the thing. If Mario catches Ryan early, well then, Mario could be in for an easy night because we've seen once his chin gets tested, Ryan becomes a completely different fighter.
I mean, he kind of checked out in the Rolly fight when it started not going his way, and I think Mario wants it bad enough, right? Just off of the fight with Ramos where he does, he gets through it. Like he wants to win bad enough that if he can just cat mug this kid early and not really even let him get started, I think he will.
I think because I've seen some of the training videos with Ryan, the skills are legitimate, right? Like I've seen it, I've seen it not just in his training videos, but we've seen it in some of his fights. Um, it's crazy because he's way better in the training videos than he is actually in fights. The whole turning his back thing, I never got that. But I think if he can assert himself early on, if he can get Mario on his skates early, I think he's got a chance to get this. The problem is even with Mario on his skates, he's not going to back down. But you've got to put a little bit of fear in Mario early.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. Like, is Mario going to circle him and try to do a classic kind of boxing match, or is he going to go, nah, fuck that. I'm the bigger guy. I'm going to push this kid around and bully him around and make him do shit he's not used to. I just think it'll be interesting to see what the approach is. Is Joe Goosen able to give Mario any insight into what Ryan doesn't like to do, whatever the case might be. But I think it'll be interesting to see what their approaches are.
Look, Joe Goosen might be probably the only reason why I'm not taking Mario to win this fight. Honestly, his track record recently isn't that great. So on paper, I'm taking Ryan. I know we're skipping ahead to that part, but yeah, I definitely take Ryan to win this fight. And part of that is because I just don't trust Goosen at this point and what he's doing. Plus, I didn't think Mario needed him. You know what I mean? At this point in his career either. So we'll see.
I think he's doing that because he's probably looking for somebody who's worked with Ryan already. I don't know that he's looking for that, but he can see that as an advantage. And Joe's an offensive coach, right? So I think that's a guy who's looking to let his hands go a little more, get fluid, and really put his punches together. But you're right. Joe's track record has not been great in recent years. And, I would have been more confident seeing Mario in with a Robert Garcia or a Manny Robles, or one of the many other super reliable trainers that are in the game today, Joel Diaz.
What's the guy that's the second to the wild card?
Marvin Somodio.
That guy.
Yep.
I think he's a gem that nobody's talking about.
Marvin's tremendous, man. I had one opportunity to be, and I'll make this quick, but I had an opportunity to be in the gym with Marvin probably 4 years ago when I was in India. I was on the Coachella production staff, and in between weeks, I got to go cover for Diaz Jr. versus Mercito Hesta, and Somodio was working with Mercito. And I learned a great lesson that day, which was when I got in the gym with those guys, Diaz was a much bigger guy than Mercito. Mercito used to fight at featherweight. This was at lightweight. And I'm in the gym and I'm watching Joel work out, and he's younger and he's much bigger, but he looks tired. He looks like he had a hard weight cut. There's no zip on his punches. And Mercito got in there and he was all zip. And he was 35 years old and he looked crisp and he looked sharp and he looked ready to go. And like that weight, he was born for that weight. And he went in and basically dominated that fight. It's part of why I talk about weight as much as I do, because I've kind of seen in person what that looks like. And I can tell, when a guy's had a hard weight cut and what that looks like in person, and understanding how that can play out in the ring. Very crazy. So that's my Marvin Somodio story. This one's got a decent little undercard on it too. Is there any of these that you want to just highlight that you're most excited for?
I'll let you have it, bro.
Listen, I think Gary Antoine Russell and Andy Hirioka is a hell of a fight. Hirioka has been super inactive, but when I've seen him on a Japanese undercard here and there, I've been impressed. I have no idea, what outside of the Ismael Barroso fight, it's limited competition. So I don't know how that's going to translate, but I like that matchup. I tell you what, the one that I'm really excited about is Frank Martin and Nahir Albright. And I'm also looking forward to Richards and Hitchens and Oscar Duarte. Hitchens and Duarte, that's probably the best fight on the card. If I'm being honest, we're just talking pure boxing
Yeah.
X's and O's. I think that's the one I could probably nerd out about the most. But I think it's a style that's kind of tailor made for Hitchens. But I think Duarte is very good at that style, that pressure style. Garcia's made him a more educated pressure fighter.
There's levels to pressure fighters. You know what I'm saying? We've all seen it. You got guys that walk forward just to walk forward, and then
And
there are
then you got
guys.
Brandon Figueroa.
Yeah. So I think that you know, there's an education that you can get from a guy like Robert Garcia that can make that pressure style effective, right? As opposed to just looking good. But yeah,
Or as
Hitchens and
opposed to
Duarte,
getting wins and getting hit so much every time.
right? I think Richard, I have to agree with you. Hitchens and Duarte is probably the best of the card, not just the undercard. Um, I'm always interested to see when one of the Garys fight, right? When one of the Gary Russells fight, I'm always interested to see what it is. But lately, it's lost a little bit of steam. You know what I'm saying? And not just because that there have been a couple losses here and there, but I think they haven't looked as a crisp as they were before Pops passed away. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or if they're just not as good as I thought they were.
Well, and to be fair, and it's easy to get our Gary Russells confused. This is Gary Antoine Russell, who's coming off a tremendous win over Rayo
Yeah.
Valenzuela, completely one-sided. So I do think that was a great comeback win for him. But you're right. They fight once a year. It's easy to forget that they're around and that they're relevant. So when they pop back up, it's like, oh, yeah, cool. But when I'm thinking about the best guys at 140, am I thinking of Gary Antoine? I'm not. Maybe I should, but he makes it easy to forget, just like his older brother, that they're around when we don't get to see that often.
I think if they were more active, because the skills, look, we don't have to talk about that, right? The Gary Russells know how to fight. The Russell brothers, I'm just going to say that, the Russell brothers know how to fucking fight. If that's one thing they do know how to do, right? It's just they don't do it enough. You know what I mean? And when they do, it's like, yeah, you just came off a really great fight, but the fight before that, your brother didn't look that well off before the fight before that. Your older brother comes back and he has a good fight, but not what we've come to know as his standard. So it's like, in order for me to get excited about you, I need to see more of it, right? Show me more, and then I can get excited. So it's going to be interesting to see a Gary Russell on any fight card. But yeah, I would say that the Hitchens and Duarte is something probably we should all tune into.
Nibs, we haven't done an updated pound for pound ranking in a long time. We've been off the air for some time, and it felt like today was a perfect day to kind of unveil the new pound for pound list we've been working on. There's been some big changes, right? We've had Terrence Crawford's retirement. We've had some wins and some losses, some tough wins and some tough losses all around the sport. But at number 10, despite a very difficult last fight, we still have our guy, Junto Nakatani.
Yeah, I mean, Junto, I think he's built up a body of work that you can allow one night off, or one bad night at the office. You know what I'm saying? Especially when it's moving up in weight. So you can say, okay, he moved up in weight. He fought a guy who's a real guy. You know what I mean? He didn't fight a bum. He didn't fight a cab driver, and it didn't look as impressive as we would have liked. But that's what happens when you move up in weight and you fight a guy. You know what I mean?
Sebastian
So,
Reyes was no joke, man. That guy was a hard motherfucker.
and let's be clear, even if Sebastian Reyes was fighting somebody who wasn't coming up in weight, he'd have made it look bad. So, let's be very, very clear about who the opponent is too. Sometimes you just have to take your hat off to the guy on the other side of the ring. And again, I think Junto has earned his 10 spot. The guy at number 9, though, and we've gone back and forth on this. It's the only reason he isn't higher is because of who else is on the list. You know what I mean? Like, we put you at 9, but we don't really feel like you're 9-ish, which is Virgil Ortiz.
Yeah, Virgil at number 9. I think at this point in the game, it's tough to not have Virgil in the rankings. I think that the body of work has accumulated, and the guys he's beating and the way he's beating them has accumulated such that this is obviously one of the great young fighters in boxing. The fight that we want to see is the fights with Boots Ennis, which I think truly makes him like a pound for pound star type of guy. If he isn't that already, that really makes him, one of the biggest stars in American boxing, if not boxing altogether. No idea when we're going to get to see that fight. That's something that we didn't talk about, as the controversy between Virgil and Golden Boy and his management has sort of unfolded over the last month. It definitely leaves some pessimism that the fight wasn't going to happen. But then I saw that maybe it is going to happen. So maybe that's something we can be optimistic about, is that we might get to see Virgil and Boots in 2026.
Look, man, I'm crossing all my fingers and toes, bro. I'm hoping and praying. I went back to church and everything. Hoping and praying that Virgil Ortiz and Boots can make a fight. I don't care if it's at 154, 165, 190. I don't give a shit. Let me see them two guys get in there and do what it does.
And by the way, his last 3 wins: Lubin, Madrimov, Boachuk. I mean, that's 3 killers right there.
That I'm not gonna even say anything else. That's drop the mic moment on that. Now, everybody else, then put this dude like 2, 3. Some people say 1 because, and we talked about this earlier, because of this fight he just had, whipping up on T.O.'s ass. But realistically, we have Shakur Stevenson at number 8. Let's face it, we did move him up because of his performance. But relatively speaking, I think when you see who else is on the list, it definitely makes sense. But being Shakur, if he puts on another performance like that, you definitely have to reconsider where he's at on the list now. But considering who we have on here, I think 8 is appropriate, bro.
I think it's perfectly appropriate. I think it's only a matter of time before he goes higher, right? You look at some of the other guys on the list that we're going to get to, but it's an aging list. It's a lot of guys in their 30s and a lot of guys in the second half of their 30s, and a lot of guys in the second half, if not second quarter of their career, or on the very tail end of their career. So I think the pound for pound landscape as a whole is going to change up very soon, within the next year or 2 or 3. It's going to be completely different than what we're looking at right now. Which is a good segue into the fact that we have Canelo Alvarez at number 7. Now, I bet there's people that don't quite understand, well, how can you have Canelo over Shakur? Well, Canelo may be an aging champion, right? But he's still active. He still brings a lot to the table. The loss that he had was to an all-time great who put on an all-time great performance. And I think to say that because Shakur just had a great performance and Canelo is coming off of a loss, that somehow pound for and people's opinion and definition of pound for pound varies, but at least for us, we kind of felt like cumulative accomplishment had enough weight that putting Canelo at number 7 above Shakur made perfect sense.
And let's be clear, we didn't come by that lightly. Like, just so you guys understand, we waited almost a full week to post our list to make sure we were giving you the right list, for us even, right? And I think you have to give that the respect that it is due because of what you just said. I mean, Canelo's had one hell of a career. And yeah, you lost your last fight, but like you said, you lost the fight to the man. Let's face it, if Terrence Crawford had not retired, he'd be at the top of this list right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's cut all the bullshit out of the way. He would be number 1 in there, and it wouldn't be close. as to who, you know what I mean, to anybody else being up there because of what he did and of the performance that he had against Canelo. Let's be, very clear there. So when you lose to a guy who's, accomplished something that probably won't be accomplished again in the sport of boxing for a good little minute, right? Yeah, we'll give you a slide on that.
Well, number 6, and this is where we really start getting into the heavy hitters of the sport. We got our guy, Big David Benavidez, coming off a tremendous 2025 wins over David Morrell and Anthony Yard, now moving up in weight to cruiserweight to take on Zordo Ramirez. I don't know. David is, I think, making the best of his situation. They're out at light heavyweight, outside of waiting for months and maybe years to get the final winner of the rivalry between Beterbiev and Bivol. This is kind of the best option, is for him to move up to cruiserweight. Would I be interested in a fight with him and Callum Smith? Sure. But that seems like that's about the best thing that he's going to be able to get at light heavyweight at the moment. Outside of the fight, he's already beaten Morrell. He's already beaten Vosdick. He's taken the other relevant fights that he can take. And I think this is his best option.
When you look at the entire sport of boxing, right? Male and female sides, weight classes be damned. It's hard to come up with someone who had a better year than Benavidez did last year. You know what I'm saying? When you look at not only the quality of the names on his ledger, but the way in which he dispatched his opponents, right? Like, it wasn't like David Benavidez was in some knockdowns, drag out wars and barely eked out a victory, or he was in some super technical boxing match where, he did just enough. No, man, he was a fairly dominant, guy against the top names, right? There were a lot of people who thought David Morrell was going to beat him, smoke him, get him out of there. You know what I mean? I'll take credit for being one of those guys. You know what I mean? Don't judge me. So when you look at the year that David Benavidez had, it again, there's an argument that he should be higher on the list, right? Again, it's another one of those things. The only thing keeping him from being higher on the list is who we have above you. You know what I mean? Like that's literally it. And then again, to your point, when we get to like the when we get to the top 5, you could say 3 or 4 of those guys probably won't be fighting in a year or two. So, where will David Benavidez be in a year from now?
Well, and who we have at 5 and 4 is Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, who have yet to fully sort out their rivalry. Hopefully that is a rivalry that we get resolved in 2026 before Beterbiev is retired and too old to make a fight of this magnitude anymore. Hope we get to see that one play out. I think obviously Bivol's got some more miles in the tank, but I think that those guys did a real number on each other too. And Bivol's been dealing with some injuries for the past year. So we got to see, what he brings to the ring if and when he comes back. But those two guys are tremendous. They're two of the best, if not the 2 best light heavyweights of all time. And I look forward to seeing number 3.
I mean, look, when you have the number 1 and number 2 guys fighting each other, right? It's going to play out like those 2 fights have played out. It's shit they make movies about, bro. And speaking of guys that give you movie worthy performances, enter the guy with one of the best names in the business, Jesse Bam Rodriguez. You know what? Sign me up 7 days a week, twice on Sunday. I watch this guy. I don't give a fuck if he's fighting in my backyard. I want to see who he's fighting. And I'm willing to pay, the bank to see it. The dude's he's prime time, bro. Like, anytime you might doubt him because of the quality opponent that he's coming up against, it seems like he seems to step it up even more when there's even a shadow of a doubt. Because he's fighting a guy. He's fighting somebody that's legitimate, has a legitimate chance of beating him, and then he puts in a performance where you're going, never mind. Sorry we doubted any portion of your game, sir. Well done.
Well, and I think it's I'm just looking at his box rec and I'm kind of marveling at it. Just in the last 4 years, really, he's beaten Carlos Cuadras, Srisaket Rungvisai, Sonny Edwards, Juan Francisco Estrada, and Fernando Martinez just in the last 4 years. And those aren't half of his fights. The other guys are quality wins too. But there's 3 all-timers in there. There's 2 of his contemporaries. Fernando Martinez was just a tremendous champion in his own right, and that was such an ass whooping. It was such a ass whooping. I don't think people really understand just how impressive of a win that was with the kind of momentum Martinez had beating Ioka. Like that to me is one of the most underrated performances in recent memory.
And for anybody that's watching this now, either live or watches it later, if you don't know who any of those names are because you're not a fan of the smaller weight fights, do yourself the favor. Rewind, pause, go back, do whatever you got to do, and take those names that Dakota just gave you and Google them. And then watch those fights that some of these guys have had, and then you'll completely understand what we're talking about. Even if you are a fan of boxing, but you don't get to check in on some of these lower weight fights, check them out anyway. I'm here to tell you these lower weight fights. I think they don't get as much love as the big boys. We all love the heavyweights. We all love the welterweights. The light heavyweights, all that, right? I'm here to tell you guys, start checking out these lower weight fights. It's a thing of beauty what some of these dudes do. So when you watch those names on that list, and then you look at how Jesse Rodriguez dispatched of them, then you can appreciate what we're talking about.
That era of smaller fighters, right? It was Cuadras, it was Rungvisai, it was Estrada, and it was Chocolatito. Chocolatito was probably the most accomplished and the biggest name, but when the dust all settled, right, and the rivalry between the two, it was really Estrada who was at the top. He was kind of the one that outlasted them all. And that is maybe Bam's best performance, and he had to get up off the deck against an all-time great, albeit aging, right? They were all a little bit older, but they all had juice left in the tank, and he just made each of those fights so easy. And it would I'm trying to think of, a fair analogy, but it would be like if Moses Atauma in 1 year beat Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, and Usyk. It was that type of it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of similar. Like if you just took 3 aging legends that still had some juice and you just beat them all in a 2-year period, this is what Jesse Bam Rodriguez did.
It's exactly like that. I mean, again, we're not talking about guys who are just good. We're talking about guys that should have golden jackets. You know what I'm saying? At the end of their careers, at some point, maybe not first ballot, second maybe, but we're talking about guys who should have gold jackets in a bus someplace. And Jesse Bam Rodriguez beat him, and he did fairly well. You know who's another guy that's really good at beating the best of the best in his division? Yeah, we got at number 2, the Monster, bro. I mean, what better nickname? I mean, Bam is a pretty good nickname for a boxer. I'll give you that. But the Monster, and the fact that you earned it, like it wasn't like you didn't make that shit up. People gave you that nickname, and then you watch him fight, and you go, "Yep, that's the guy." I don't really even think it's fair at this point to judge him against everybody else, man. I really don't. Like maybe Bivol, maybe Usyk. You know what I'm saying? Bam, maybe. Now that Bam's even putting more legends on his ledger, but who else really can you compare him to in boxing right now?
Well, we can only hope that one day we get to see Bam versus the Monster. I don't know if the weights and the ages and the eras will ever line up, but a boy can dream. Listen, bro, Inoue's we've talked about it in his last couple fights. He's on an absolutely legendary run. He's now up at 126 pounds. And yeah, the knockouts are not quite as frequent as they were at lower weights, but he's fighting bigger guys. And when you fight the absolute best in the division, or you're mandatory every single time out, You don't always get the knockout, but against David Picasso, he won probably all but 1 or 2 rounds. The fight against MJ Akhmadaliev, that felt like the last stone unturned for him at 122 pounds. I think I said 126 before, I meant 122. And now the question is, will he be able to go up to 126 pounds? Is he interested in going up to that weight, or is he going to make the fight with Junto Nakatani here in 2026 and create an all Japanese mega fight at 122 pounds to sort of create like who is the best of the golden era of Japanese boxing?
You know what's crazy is, let's say that fight gets made. Hopefully it does. Hopefully it gets made. They have an amazing fight. If Inoue wins that fight, he could literally just shut it down right then, say, I'm done. I did everything I need to do, and would walk away the man as far as Japanese boxing is concerned. And as far as I'm concerned, you wouldn't be able to do much more at the lower weights to, you know what I mean? Like pretty much 130 and down, to me, he'd be the greatest of all time. If he hung it up after beating a Junto Nakatani, like
I'd have to
you'd
think
be
about
very
it.
hard-pressed to find
Obviously,
somebody like that.
I'd have to think about it, but like my gut tells me, like, yeah, I can't think of a guy below featherweight that I think could fuck with this guy.
No. And we're talking about Chocolatito at his best. We're talking about Estrado at his best. We're talking about Nonito at his best. I'm talking prime guys, right? Give them their primes, and I don't think any of them hold a feather to him, bro. That's how impressive it is. And what's fucked up is lately, I almost feel like when he's had some little bit of a turbulence earlier in his fights, it gives us better performances down the stretch. Like when after he gets knocked down, the guy he becomes after a knockdown is I would almost be like if I was the other fighter and I knocked him down and it wasn't over, I'd be like, oh shit. Because
Knockdowns are like a wake-up call for him.
bro, he really does turn into a monster after he gets knocked down. Cause like, oh, what? And then it's a completely different thing. And it's over after that, bro.
Well, as we wrap the show up, we got to go with who the number one guy is, and it's Alexander Usyk, who until he retires or loses that throne, it's going to be tough for anyone to surpass him. An all-time great heavyweight, an all-time great fighter, and I think a generational talent whose accomplishments at this point are undeniable.
I don't think that people understand what Usyk really did, right? Like if you are just thinking about what he did at heavyweight, it's impressive, right? But I think if you look at what he did from where he started and who he's beaten at the cruiserweight level, and not only who he's beaten at the heavyweight level, but how he's done it, right? Like, let's be very clear. He had some dominant wins against guys that you just don't dominate. You know what I mean? You might get a lucky shot against Fury. You might get a lucky shot against, Anthony Joshua. But it's hard to be able to say, I dominated either one of those guys. I dominated, pretty much the entire cruiserweight division without a scratch.
I dominated Daniel Dubois at 38 years old in a rematch.
I mean, you have to think about those things, right? Because when you look at, again, not just the fact that he's been able to put on boxing clinics, but who the opponents have been, the coming from cruiserweight to heavyweight and being as dominant as he is, hasn't been done since what, the Holyfield era?
And I don't think Holyfield was ever as dominant as Usyk is.
No. He had a run.
Sure.
Usyk has basically had two separate careers, when you look at who he's fought. And then let's not take, and I really don't like to get political, but let's be really clear, folks. He did all this while his home country is actively at war. You know what I'm saying?
Not just at war, invaded.
Right.
There's a foreign military on his streets while he's preparing for fights.
Bro, he had to go back and deal with that on his own, help his countrymen, and then come back into fighting. I don't think you understand how impressive that really is. Like it's a thing that will always give me a level of respect for Lomachenko, no matter where his career ends up. You know what I mean? Same thing with Usyk. It's when the Klitschko's, when they had their thing going on, it gave me a whole different level of respect for them as well. But
Muhammad Ali going to prison because he wouldn't fight in the Vietnam War.
Right.
It's that type of shit.
It's that kind of shit. It elevates you beyond just boxing, bro. And I want people to really guys, that war is still going on. Let's be clear. That fight hasn't ended, and this guy is still boxing while his home, not someplace away from his home or part of his home. His home is being torn apart by war, and this guy is still doing what he's doing. That's one of the most impressive things. More impressive pretty much than anything he'll ever do in a boxing ring, but it makes what he's done inside the boxing ring even more impressive. And, again, like you said, Dakota, until he's either defeated inside the ring or walks away, as far as I'm concerned, he's number one, bro.
Nibs, it's good to be back, my brother. We will be back next week, also with some updated female pound-for-pound rankings, but as we always do, please remind the people why it's so important to support local boxing.
Look, man, another quote from, one of the greatest of all time, Sugar Ray Robinson: to be a champ, you have to believe in yourself when nobody else will. Well, guess what, guys? It's a lot easier to believe in yourself when other people do, right? So when people from your hometown believe in you, it's a lot easier to believe in yourself, even if you're not getting that love on a regular basis. Just knowing that your hometown is there for you, no matter what level of boxing or what level of the fight game you're in, having someone believe in you can will you into being a better person, a better fighter, a better champion, and give you the will to wake up and do it every day. Because guess what, guys? This sport isn't easy. It's not the easiest thing to get into. Especially at certain levels, it's definitely not the most celebrated. So, believe in the people in your area, believe in the not only the athletes but the trainers and the people that are help putting on these shows, so that we can continue to get quality work and we can come back to you every week and talk about it.
Support local boxing. It's not always fucking glamorous. We'll catch you next week, guys. Peace.